So does the Bible really talk about giants? Like really? Aren't these things faked or like a myth? Is there anything else besides the Bible that might mention this story to corroborate it? We'll go through that today. This is going to be a study into what the Bible and history and science all have to say about giants. So in the Bible, the Anakim were a race of the descendants of the Nephilim, and the Nephilim were a race of giants on the earth according to the Bible. Genesis 4:6 is the first mention of the Nephilim. We'll just jump there real quick, see what it says. Genesis in Hebrew is Bereshit. Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the ancient heroes, the men of renown. Some people call them demigods, or kind of just depends on the culture you're looking into. But the Nephilim, the giants, were real according to the biblical account. And Genesis 6:4 is the first mention of them, and there were many giants and references to giants' cities in the Bible. The biblical texts refer to high barred cities with walls up to the heavens. And it's not like we have the exact height, but I mean, that's pretty big. So Deuteronomy 1:28 and Deuteronomy 9 verses 1 and 2 talk about that. And I'm not sure that we fully understand the magnitude of these things. Can you imagine a city made for giants? Like, just one bed for a giant was approximately like 13 foot by 13 foot. That's basically like a queen size bed for two giants. That's enough for two giants to sleep side by side. They're 12, 13 foot. So yeah, this was just what a lot of scholars say. The average giant was anywhere from 7 to 15 feet tall. So just try to visualize their kitchen or their living room. If their bed was like 13 to 14 feet by 13 to 14 feet, like that's massive. So imagine a city of a giant. And there was multiple cities of the giants, and that's what Joshua and the whole conquest through Canaan and for Canaan was about, was wiping out the Nephilim bloodline. Some people think oh, God was mad at them, but no, it's because they were doing horrible stuff, and they had these demonic beings on earth. So I can see why God would want to get rid of them. But let's look up some scripture and see what the Bible actually says about this. We went through Genesis 6:4. Numbers 13:33, it says, "And there we also saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, the Anakim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and we also seemed that way to them too." So they're saying they were like grasshoppers compared to these giants, which, I mean, that would make sense. These people weren't tall. The average Jewish person back in the day probably would have been like 5, maybe 5.5, 6 foot was pretty tall. So yeah, imagine seeing a 15-foot person or even a 9-foot person. Like, that's quite a big difference. So Deuteronomy 1:28 says, where are we going up? And our brothers have made our hearts melt, saying, these people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. And besides that, we have seen the son of Anakim there, which is the giants. So basically saying, their cities are huge and fortified, and they have giants. Our hearts are melting, we're kind of scared. Which I get. So Deuteronomy 3:11, for only Og, the king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bed was a bed of iron, and its length was 9 cubits, and 4 cubits in breadth, according to the common cubit. And this is where we get the 13-foot to 14-foot bed. But apparently it was only like 6 to 7 foot wide, so I guess that would be, yeah, kind of like a queen bed, enough for 2 giants to lay there comfortably and sleep for the night. So, Deuteronomy 12, verse 1 through 2, Hear, Israel, you are now about to cross the Jordan and go into and dispossess nations greater and stronger than you, with large cities that have walls up to the sky. The people are strong and tall, Anakites. You know about them and have heard it said, who can stand up against the Anakites? Again, these were known to be a group of giants in the land of Canaan. So the Israelites identified Anakites with the Nephilim, a group of giants before the flood. Joshua eventually expelled the Anakites from the land in Joshua 11, except for some who went down to the Philistine cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Goliath was from Gath, and Gath was a Philistine stronghold city in the ancient times. So let's look at Joshua 11 real quick. This is a New Living Translation. It says, During this period Joshua destroyed all the descendants of Anak, who lived in the hill country of Hebron, Debir and Anab, and the entire hill country of Judah and Israel. And in modern times, Hebron is known as Al-Khalil, and it is a city in the west bank of Palestine. So Joshua killed them all and completely destroyed their town. None of the descendants of Anak were left in the land, though still some remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. And that's where I was talking about Goliath came in. So 1 Samuel 17, 4 through 7 describes Goliath being 7 to 9 foot tall. Some scholars may think he might have been up to 12 feet tall due to the length of his spear. His spear had an iron point and a shaft that was larger than a weaver's beam, and the weaver's beam would have been approximately 30 pounds back in that day. That was what people would use to make carpets. I don't know if you've seen a carpet making machine by hand, but the weavers had a beam. So yeah, the spearhead weighed roughly 15 pounds, and the whole spear would have weighed about 35, 40 pounds. His coat of armor weighed roughly 125 pounds. The Israeli army likely knew all this because they kept all the stuff that he had on him after killing him. And David actually later uses Goliath's sword while he's fleeing from Saul in 1 Samuel 21 verse 9. I just love that idea. But let's jump into 1 Samuel 17. It says, A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits, and his span was 5 cubits. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. And on his legs were bronze greaves and a bronze javelin slung on his back. That's the spear. And his spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. That's the biblical weights and measurements. I broke it down in the modern English. You're welcome to fact check me. You have Google as well as I do. So yeah, 1 Samuel 21:9, where David has the sword of Goliath. The priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." So I just think that's really cool. So not only does the Bible describe there being giants, but actual cities. They describe weights and measurements of their bed, their armor, their weaponry. So from a biblical standpoint, I think it's realistic and totally fine to say that giants are biblical. But we'll get into the science and other history soon. So 2 Samuel 21:16 describes Ishbi-Benobi's bronze spear as weighing 7.5 pounds, and he was a descendant of the giants and was armed with a sword as well as a large spear. And the text reads, Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, and was armed with a new sword, said that he would kill David. So this was a giant saying that he was going to kill David. He had a new sword. 2 Samuel 21:18, just a couple verses later, talks about Saph's death, and he was a descendant of Goliath. So let's read that. The text says, "After this there was again war with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sychabai the Hushathite struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants." And again, that's just what the Bible says, people. I'm not going to argue with the Bible. 2 Samuel 21:19 refers to Goliath's brother being killed by one of David's men. Goliath's brother's spear had a shaft like a weaver's rod, kind of like Goliath's, and a weaver's rod was about 2 inches thick and anywhere from 5 to 10 feet long. Some scholars suggest that his spear would have been about 10 foot with a 5-pound counterweight, because it had the 15-pound head here and a small counterweight at the bottom, so when you throw, it evens it. Spears are amazing weapons. But this is just one man's spear. Again, there was a whole nation of people that God wanted to wipe out. They had cities, they had massive cities, and big weaponry. They were giants. So the text literally reads, 2 Samuel 21:19, "In another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jair, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, who had a spear like a shaft like a weaver's rod." In Joshua 11, it says, "The Israelites completely destroyed every living thing in the city, leaving no survivors. Not a single person was spared. And Joshua burned the city. Joshua slaughtered all the other kings and their people, completely destroying them, just as Moses had commanded." So that was kind of the end of that for them. But 2 Samuel 21 verse 20 goes on to talk about a giant with 6 fingers and 6 toes on each foot. The text reads, "In another battle which took place at Gath, there was a huge man, giant, with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He was also a descendant from Rapha." So you see a repeated bloodline of Rapha and the Anakim and the Anakenites throughout the giant trilogy. And 1 Chronicles 20 verse 5 describes Lami's spear as being as large as a beam. And the word beam used in the Old Testament here is used to describe a variety of things, including a weaver's shuttle or beam and a wooden rafter. Can you imagine a spear that's as big as a rafter? Like, that's pretty big. And Lamy was also a brother of Goliath. Goliath had a few brothers or sons, according to the Bible. It's a little unclear. We're going to look at the verse next. But, yeah, it's a little unclear. It's 2 Samuel 21, verse 22. These four were born to the giant in Gath, and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. And so it's unclear whether or not they're brothers or sons. I kind of read it as sons because there were descendants of Goliath. But anyway, we'll talk about Lamy's spear here in 1 Chronicles 20. In another battle with the Philistines, Elhanan, son of Jair, struck down Lamy, the brother. I feel like we just read that. I don't know. So Amos 2, verse 9 refers to the strength and the height of the Amorites. Numbers 13 talks about how the giant sons of Anak were among the Amorites in Hebron. So Amos 2:9, yet I destroyed the Amorites before them, though they were as tall as cedars and as strong as oaks. I destroyed their fruit above and their roots below. And some people try to spiritualize this and say it's not talking about giants. I personally think it is. That's why I added it here. But Numbers 13:22 says, and they went up into the Negeb and came to Hebron, and Ahiman, Sheshai, Talmai, the sons of Anak, were there. And Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. So that just talks about how the sons of Anak, the giants, were in Hebron. And it seems like the giants were present in Old Testament times, but now can we find anything in modern evidence of giants, like perhaps a giant skull or something meaningful to point us towards more information? So the Smithsonian giants are an interesting source of information about ancient giants. Some say at one time the Smithsonian Museum had possession of bones of giants and they destroyed them. A lot of people think there's just a conspiracy theory, and we'll go into some of that later, but let's not just start with speculation. Let's look at some undisputed stuff. So Black Dog, also known as Osage Chief, lived in 1780 to 1848. He was a Native American chief among the Osage people in modern-day Kansas. And Black Dog was said to be a towering height of 7.5 feet tall, weighing approximately 400 pounds. He was blind in his left eye. Not that that matters, but that's in the logs of the letters and notes of the customs and manners of the North American Indians from 1875, if you want to look that up. So also in 1608, Captain John Smith found a unique warlike tribe of people along the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania and Maryland. They lived in fortified cities. John Smith described them as giant-like people and great and well-proportioned. He also claimed that one of the warriors' calves measured 27 inches around. I'm like 6'5", about 200 pounds. My calf measures about 14 inches around, so that would be massive. Okay? Crazy thought. So what about the skeleton and armor found in Fall River, Massachusetts in 1832, this is an interesting source of information about a giant skeleton unearthed. Sadly, supposedly, the skeleton was destroyed in a fire in 1843. There is a photo included in a newspaper article about the skeleton which shows what it looked like. So that's kind of photographic evidence, but let's talk about Dr. Phineas Leland and what he has to say on the matter. The skeleton was found in the year 1832 in a sand and grave bank a little east of a Unitarian meeting house by some persons while digging away and removing a portion of the bank. The skeleton was found near the surface in a sitting posture, the leg bones doubled up into the thigh bones, and the thighs brought nearly parallel with the body. It was quite perfect. It stood remarkably well to the test of exposure. Covering the sternum was a triangular plate of brass, somewhat corroded by time, and around the body was a broad belt made of small brass tubes, 4 to 5 inches in length, about the size of a pipe stem, placed parallel and close to each other. The arrowheads made of copper or brass were also found in the grave. These were the remains of an Indian, it seemed, generally. The configuration of the skull, the position in which it was found, and the additional facts of the other skeletons found nearby in the same place renders it most certainly that they were bones of Indians, according to this Dr. Phineas Leland, and he examined the body and arrowheads and was a part of the excavation. So another particular example of giants comes from a well-known person in the mid-1800s, the President Abraham Lincoln. In 1948, he's quoted as saying, the eyes of that species of extinct giants whose bones fill the mounds of America have gazed on Niagara, as do we now. Some people say that was used out of context, but I believe Lincoln was familiar with the fact of giants. Giants were generally known about before the 1900s, and the idea that giant skeletons were buried across America was pretty common. In 1881, the Congress gave sole excavation rights of these mounds to the Smithsonian. That's where a lot of people say the Smithsonian got these bones and eventually destroyed them. But Congress actually funded that excavation of the mounds in the following years. So, yeah, just an interesting thought. Another story, in 1911, two bat guano miners searching the caves of Nevada stumbled upon a large skeleton, and then they found another one. So there's two large skeletons, and these are known as the Lovelock Giants of Nevada. They measured 8.5 to 10 foot, and the museum, so they were 8.5 to 10 foot, and there's a lot of speculation and criticism around them, but I think the evidence is piling up in favor of there being giants. So that's just me. There's also the Museum of Ritos Andioso in Peru, which holds some of the world's most unusual and fascinating skulls. It has elongated skulls from a non-human baby and a few hundred other elongated skulls from around the world. Some scientists and biblical scholars believe that the skulls to be a practice of wrapping the skull as a child to make the head a certain way, but other research suggests that one certain baby doesn't have the proper human DNA. And furthermore, these practices were not proven to work, and they don't really explain why or how the skulls got elongated and stayed that way. They just say it might be possible. So there's also a small-known story about a Spanish conquistador named Pedro Ciza de Leon in the 16th century, He documented an old Peruvian story about giants based on his writings. These were towering beings that came by the sea in rafts of reeds and manners of large boats. And some of the men were so tall that from the knee down they were as big as the length of an ordinary man. So it was about 5 foot to their knee, basically, is what he's saying. And I tend to think these people are not lying. Of course, I can be wrong, but I just want to present you with my thoughts and findings. There's also medical stories of giantism in modern and ancient times, where the individual grows to be an unusual height. We could be dealing with that, but it's unlikely considering that there were generations of them and they were scattered throughout the world. It is possible, though. Also, these giants or people suffering with giantism, they don't always have the muscle mass to sustain them for a long life. So they get kind of tall and die early. So, yeah, it's kind of just a sad thought, and I don't think that's what the Bible's talking about when these guys are out fighting wars like Goliath. Just a thought. So let us look at a few quick examples from our modern times before we wrap up. And these are military accounts. And I know some people don't trust military accounts. I personally do, just because they have a lot to lose in their social life and their family life and their career if they came out as believers in giants or in favor of something unknown or not politically correct. So these are current stories of giants living in the mountains of Afghanistan in the 2000s era. One story is commonly known as the Giant of Kandahar, and it is a team of military special intelligence unit soldiers that encountered a giant in the Kandahar mountains of Afghanistan. The giant was said to be 10 to 12 feet in height, have red hair, 6 fingers on each hand, and use a spear as a weapon. That sounds pretty biblical. And there was multiple people corroborating the story, but the combat unit engaged the giant with machine guns, just as any military trained unit would do, and then the giant attacked back. And most of the soldiers were lost in this battle, according to most sources. They were able to get over to the radio that they were under attack, so more people came eventually and killed the giant. So the rescue mission unit came, and they ultimately killed the giant after some warfare, and supposedly the government took their body, the giant's body, to an undisclosed location. But there's been eyewitness testimony about the helicopter pilots and people who were on the ground and shooting at this thing. And of course, we don't have the names. They never came out publicly, but they did come out and say that this happened. So, I don't know. To me, it appears that people have a range of about 6 to 10 foot. So it appears that people from the range of 6 to 10 feet have clearly existed multiple times throughout history in different contexts and different cultures. We have examples from the Bible, history, and science. Like, what do you guys think about all this? Do you think there were giants? Do you think this is fake? Like, let me know what you think. Drop a comment. Is all this just hogwash and I should forget about it? Just focus on Jesus? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you.